and welcome to the Conversation podcast. Today, we're very privileged in hosting one of the distinguished Zambians. I think that has been very key to the democratic development of our country. Kryticous Patrick Nshindano is a distinguished public policy and electoral management expert. He has over 18 years senior management experience across from public, private, and civil society. He has a career that is marked by commitment to promoting free and fair elections, strengthening governance, and democratic institutions. Many of you will remember him as a Chief Electoral Officer for the Electoral Commission of Zambia, and he successfully oversaw the 2021 general elections, ensuring a smooth and peaceful transition of government. Mr. Patrick Nshindano, welcome to today's Conversation podcast.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Highly humbled to be here. Even the introduction, I'm even scared. Is that really me?
Well, you have achieved so much for our country that we may have to throw a few flowers at you while you are alive. We believe that we have to raise one another while we are alive than us standing, at the foot of your cemetery or grave, and then we eulogize you. It's better we say it in your face.
Indeed.
You've contributed a lot.
The same can be said about you, Ambassador. We need to recognize the role that you have played, and indeed, you've continued to be able to profile individuals, but be able to continue to champion the cause of how we can develop as our country, and indeed our democratic dispensation as a whole.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Many people saw you holding those press briefings, hosting various political leaders. The most powerful people in our country usually are politicians from diverse background, and you were holding them sway, they were listening to you, they were hearing your guidelines. But before we get to that, people want to know, who's Kryticous Patrick Nshindano? And for me, Kryticous sounds Greek. Let's start from there.
Yes, indeed. It is Greek.
Oh, it is?
It is Greek. My mom is actually half Greek. The father to my mother is actually a Greek national. Okay. So this is where I get it from. It's actually a name from it's my grandfather's name. So Kryticous is my grandfather's name. Basically implying one who hails from Crete, but also has a direct meaning, which is critical. But I'm not critical, not at all. Yeah, so it definitely is. I was born in Chingola, but of course, you recall that during our registration of NRCs, you have a lot of these challenges. On my NRC, you find that my birthplace is basically in Ndola, but I was actually born in Chingola at the Mine Hospital, and hopefully I can do an affidavit one of these days and rectify that.
So what is on the NRC since it says Ndola? Yeah, usually issuance of NRC those days were first very difficult. They were not decentralized. Yes. So for example, if you're on the Copper Belt, you had to go to Ndola.
Yes, but also the issue of birth records, yes.
Yeah, and birth records too.
Yes,
if it's for birth records, we only began to issue birth certificates in 1972. If you're born before that, if you produce a birth certificate, they'll tell you, Zambia began to produce birth certificates in 1972. And again, that entire process wasn't highly decentralized. So there are people, even when we began to issue birth certificates, that didn't obtain birth certificates. But for NRCs, I agree with you. It's usually between elections that then you would see registration officers coming near where you are.
Indeed.
Okay, so did you go to school in Chingola?
No, I didn't go. I actually did my primary very far from Chingola. I started my primary school in the eastern part, and this is because my mother used to work for ZCBC then. And she was the manager for ZCBC, and she was transferred to Chipata.
To our young audience, they might not know what ZCBC is. This was a retail chain. Yes. It was a state-owned enterprise. There were 3 or 4 key ones. Niek, Mwaiseni, but ZCBC was the one that was in every district.
Indeed.
Yeah, it was like what you'd call ShopRite now.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So she used to manage the Chipata branch. So she was transferred there. And of course, the family followed through. And I started off my primary school there. I was at Hillside Primary School. I really loved the place. Up to now, I still love Chipata. I think the scenery is amazing. The people also are very amazing individuals. And I hope one day I can find myself a small piece of land and still go back to Chipata.
Such nice fond memories.
Indeed. I loved the mountain climbing and chasing monkeys, getting into tires and rolling yourselves as kids off the mountain, those hills and so forth.
Yes.
When you look back and you're saying, how am I still alive? But you see, children have a way of getting around these things.
No, we are bad parents. We'd never allow a child to roll up the mountain on a tire.
No.
We would be thinking of breaking bones, breaking your neck, and we just never allow it. But you did it.
We did that. It was really fun. Yes, it did. So after leaving that, of course, we came back to the Copper Belt, and I started my secondary. My secondary, I went to Luansha Boys Secondary.
Oh, okay.
So I was at Luansha Boys. That's where I did part of my secondary, and then completed my secondary at in Ndola at Satya Sai Secondary School. It was a boys' school. I think we were one of the, if not the second intake of that particular school.
Yeah.
A brilliant school, very nice. I think the
Satya,
ethics.
is this the one that was donated by India? Is it or it was just a private school?
It is a private school, but of course it has its origins in India. Of course, based on the faith of one Satya Sai, who is basically a faith grouping as well.
Okay.
But it accommodated all faiths, and even in our proceedings, we would basically recite, for example, the Psalms in the morning and things like that, for us to be able to grow up in a spiritual manner, and it was quite character building, I must say. I think there was quite a lot that went. If there's anything as it relates to education and character building, I can attribute it mainly to that particular school. It was very molding in that area.
Okay. Okay. After you are done with school, did you begin work, or did you go to university? What did you decide?
Yes, I did. First of all, start work. I started working for Farmanova Zambia Limited.
The pharmaceutical company.
The pharmaceutical company in Ndola, but also enrolled at the University of Zambia to start my bachelor's. Initially, my intention, of course, with the link of a pharmaceutical company was to get into medicine. And I did get into medicine because I did get quite good grades when at my secondary school. This is grade 12. I did very well. I got into university. I was accepted in the School of Natural Sciences, but somehow I was unable to proceed due to family issues, and came back and continued with my work with Farmanova. They were very embracing, surprisingly, and even now when I look back, I was like, okay, I had nothing to show for at that particular point in time, but this company...
But why did you abandon university? Family issues, what were the issues?
There were quite a number. First, of course, we had some movements which needed to happen within the family, and at the time, of course, I had applied into School of Medicine, natural sciences then, with a view of course, getting bursaries, because I had qualified at the time to get into bursaries, which I didn't get, unfortunately. And everybody was ready that he's going to go into it and he's going to get a bursaries because he's got good grades and he's going to get it. So when that didn't fall through, the family decided, okay, no, you go in the following year. So that we are ready for you to be able to undertake the exercise, because it was immediate enrollment after passing. But also, you know, the challenges. When you're coming from a private school, the considerations are usually different.
Correct.
So that presented a hurdle. So I said, okay, no problem. A year is not too much to lose out. But when I did reapply, I went into humanities, and I changed course to do economics. So whilst I was doing that, I decided not to go directly into university as a full-time student at the beginning, but continue to work with Farmanova so that I can, first gain that work experience, but also get the education. So I started actually under distance education for the first 2 years, and then went in for the third and fourth final year as a full-time student, graduating in economics from the University of Zambia.
Ah, okay. So before you're an electoral expert, you're actually an economist.
Yes, indeed. That's where my foundation is. Yes, indeed.
Now tell us your brief then venture, and how did you end up at civil society? Because I think the first time we begin to see you regularly and listen to you on radio, is now when you are a civil society leader.
Yes, indeed. I didn't even go directly into civil society because I went back again into private sector. I did work for Prime Pharmaceuticals in the same industry. Prime Pharmaceuticals. I was also a country rep for Shelley's Pharmaceutical in Tanzania for their products in Zambia as it relates to branding. So that kind of...
Also, the foundation you got at Pharmanova now enticed you to pursue literally pharmacy and the pharmaceutical work.
Pharmaceutical work, and there was quite a lot of industry. That's the time they were actually launching antiretrovirals. So under Prime, I was actually tasked also to promote the antiretrovirals in the mining sector. To the copper belt, so we did open up a number of
because
areas.
mass employers such as the army, miners, teachers were critically hit by the HIV/AIDS pandemic.
So the triple therapy medication which came in really did help, and you could see that changing people's lives. But in whatever I did, there was always been that passion for me, firstly, to be able to help my country. And in a way, I think in my entire path has kind of put me in that direction. Whilst in primary school, I was always appointed in leadership positions. At secondary school, I was deputy, then head boy. When I went to university, I headed the University of Zambia Business and Economics Association. I was the president for that. So I think it just has been there where God is saying, putting you in line, saying, okay, you need to save your country. And that has always been at the back in whatever I do, whether it was in the private sector, moving into civil society, and of course the Electoral Commission. So that has been the part. So before getting into civil society, I played a critical role in the private sector, specifically the pharmaceutical industry.
The health sector, especially regarding ARVs, because there's a lot of stigma.
Indeed.
People didn't want to get treatment. People didn't want people to know that they were on treatment. In fact, many people sometimes would hide even from their partners.
Yes.
We saw funding in that sector tied to the donor corporation, for example, the USAID and the PEPFAR fund by President George Bush to fight HIV/AIDS, I think was very instrumental. But also, how cooperation comes. Cooperation is tied. It's like if China is giving you a road, they'll give you a contractor too. I think many firms, like your firms, must have lost out because the Americans came with this bully of money, but also bully of their suppliers.
Yes, but if you recall, at that particular time, those that had the rights, what do you call this? When you innovate something, the term has gone. You tend to have the rights to that particular product, especially in the pharmaceutical industry. At the time, you had big guys like the GlaxoSmithKline and so forth, and their antiretrovirals were extremely expensive. And when that licensing period expired, then you had the generics coming in from India. So when the generics came in, I think that made it quite simpler, even where they were cheap and affordable. So a lot more were able to access those antiretrovirals, especially the triple therapy. But before that, it was extremely expensive. One would wonder how one would be able to meet the cost and be able to survive. And this is where you saw a lot of programs under the USAID was one of those that had a huge program supporting that, especially government, where they would provide to healthcare facilities, people will be able to access these for free. But as you indicated at the beginning, there was a lot of stigma. So for one to be able to get to there, and they had a separate unit area where people go and collect those. So people know, waenda huku. Obviously, and the term kanayak and things like
Yes,
that.
yes.
So that stigma was there, and it's good to see that it's reduced. It's still there, but it's drastically reduced, and people now know that you can live a healthy and good life even after contracting that. But there was also a lot of interventions as it relates to education around how one can be able to sustain themselves and keep safely and so forth, supply of contraceptives in addition to protective measures such as condoms and including the introduction of female condoms and so forth.
Yes, so very controversial, female condoms.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
So that was my experience in the private sector. So out of that,
civil society.
Yes.
What brought you to civil society?
Civil society, I was actually firstly brought in through the Economics Association of Zambia as a result of my
As an
background.
economist?
As an economist.
You joined the fraternity?
I joined the fraternity as a young profession. Actually, Mr. Isaac Ngoma played a critical role. I'm sure you know Mr. Isaac Ngoma very well. He was, we did interact quite closely when I was at university as the president of Unzabeka, and he did support the association, him being president of the Economics Association of Zambia. So he did see something in me, and I'm glad he did, and said, okay, would you like to come and intern for us as a young economic profession? I said, yes, I think that's a great opportunity. And of course, I did join the Economics Association from intern. Hardly a month into the internship, I was given a programs officer role, full-time programs officer role. Which I did very well, and after that, I saw myself transitioning now into mainstream civil society organization, civil society, as it were, joining the Civil Society for Poverty Reduction as an information person. So you can see the diversity.
Also, your interest and numerous comments on budget, national planning, and I think then you incorporated in all those teams comes from there.
Comes from there, because we did a lot of work. And at the time I was with the Economics Association, that's the time we had the global economic crunch. So you can imagine that there was a lot...
The 2008 one.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was a lot of anxiety around the world with financial institutions collapsing, issues to do with real estate management and so forth, but also the impact that was going to have on third world countries. And being a fresh graduate, I was given that responsibility and opportunity to also do core papers around that issue. I do recall being sent to one of the high-level forums in Johannesburg under the Open Society initiative, looking at these issues, how it's going to impact Zambia. I did a paper on that. It was brilliant. It was one of those few that was actually authored.
Oh, wow.
And published.
You know, the subprime mortgage crisis of 2008, where I think American financial institutions turned these subprime houses, literally that have no value, grouped them together and then began to trade them.
Yes.
And they changed hands so many times, but by the time they were at the end and credible institutions were buying them, they were highly overvalued. Yes. And they caused that crunch. But of course, there were big companies that fell, like you said, and there was even big bailouts that were done by government. We'll come to that, but I wonder why we don't respond in the manner the American government did. And I'm glad you did a paper on it, which you can maybe highlight. In the crisis, the American government, Barack Obama was just new president. He embraced the crisis, and he said we have to spend and spend.
Yes.
First, the bailout itself was controversial to bail out the big companies, but also the spending on infrastructure. In Zambia, when we are in a crisis, we see they close out the economy. They reduce money circulation. They reduce lending. They hike. Literally, they suck out money. But the crisis, the crunch in 2008, how Far East Asia and the US responded was the opposite.
Yes.
Into expenditure. I don't know.
Stimulation.
Maybe you economists go to different schools.
Yeah, I think well, they always say where two economists agree, then you know there's a problem. So you always have these different schools of thought approaches coming in. And the major difference, like I've seen, is that in our case, when we have a crisis, instead of approaching it from a stimulus point of view, we always kind of apply contractionary measures. Even when we say we want to grow the economy, we want to do that, and this can even be seen now. We have a lot of challenges, but the measures and policies we are putting in place are one that contract the economy. So I think there are quite a number of factors that one would take into place. Maybe it's the fact that we also have very high poverty levels, and they're trying to see how do we balance between that stimulus mechanism as well as protecting the poor, because the stimulus also tends to push inflation up. So maybe it's trying to curb that. But of course, colleagues at the Bank of Zambia will be better placed.
You wrote a paper how
but in the
states could respond
yes, in
to
the
crisis. Because the crisis was no longer a US crisis. It became a global crisis.
Yes.
And it affected all stock exchanges from Hong Kong to NASDAQ. So, and you wrote a paper. What did you recommend
in the context of Zambia, it was basically looking at it from the aspect of how it was going to impact us as a country vis-a-vis our export, especially as it relates to copper. What we saw is that even the demand for that went low, because clearly even investments dwindled, and how could third world countries like ourselves be able to respond in such a situation? So one of the aspects, of course, was to look at fiscal regimes that existed and how those fiscal regimes were able to respond, but also capital ownership. And unfortunately, this still remains a struggle for most third world countries in terms of who controls the capital and how that is influenced. Mechanisms as it relates to pricing. As we know, we have no say in the pricing of our commodities, our precious commodities. This is determined through the London Metal Stock Exchange, taking into account other factors as well. So there's very little control. But also what we try to do is look at the various fiscal regimes as it relates to mining taxation. And I was fortunate enough, I picked up some of that knowledge, even when I was doing my master's at the University of Zambia. I based my thesis on mining taxation.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So that did feed into that, to basically look at the various fiscal regimes, and at what particular point did we look at which was the best fiscal mechanism or tax policy we had put in place to give us the required reward as a country.
You make me divert. Mining taxation policy, I think, is very critical to our country.
Indeed.
We seem to get it wrong all the time. Yeah. We have this huge resource which we do not benefit from. Sure. We bend our backs to foreign investment, especially because this is a large-scale player. I think it attracts large-scale players in the sector. But our country benefit very little or nothing. Yes. Other than the employment that they may offer, which is actually now no longer even permanent, it's just contractual. They're like, they're really not even jobs to say, they're just contracts, very short-term contracts. And there's little to show that Zambia is endowed in this huge mineral resource. From your studies, and I'm glad you did your master's program based on mining and this taxation, what should be ideal? How can we strike a balance between the rent and the assets we have?
True. That is a very huge debate, and I'm sure civil society colleagues and a lot of patriots in the country have cried out about how we are getting a raw deal from this natural wealth. Firstly, I think a starting point is the recognition that this is a God-given resource, a resource that is depleting, a resource that once depleted will never have back. You said, what do we have to show for? We have a lot of holes on the copper belt. I come from the copper belt. We have a lot of holes to show for, unfortunately. When it comes to beneficiation, very little. And why do I say very little? We've had periods, and I'm sure Ambassador you can attest to this, where Zambia did extremely well. And I've always put this forward as an argument, especially given my bias towards making sure that Zambians, especially the majority, benefit from the natural wealth. But also when you're talking about sustainable development, who is it for? Is it just an issue of macroeconomic indicators, or it's for the masses? At the end of the day, you need to demonstrate that the people are well off in whatever it is. Coming to the point of the periods where we've done very well, we did under the MMD where we had superb economic indicators. Specifically, I believe it is during President Banda.
Rupiah
Banda, if my memory serves me right. If you look at the macroeconomic, GDP growth was around 7, approaching 10%, doing very well. Of course, when you look at on the other flip side, as it relates to poverty levels, there was nothing to show for. So as it relates to mining, we need to recognize one key component is that the issue of capital ownership is extremely important. We cannot, even when you're looking at your fiscal regime, you need to look at who owns this. At the end of the day, what you see is that most of this is externalized. But also this obsession we have for incentivization needs to come to an end. Investment, real investment, does not need incentives, and there are studies to prove that. One of my stints in the civil society while I was at ActionAid International, we did studies along these lines, and you could see clearly that our investors are not interested in these incentives. What they're interested in is a stable environment that is going to make sure that they're able to make a profit. They'll look at the venture.
If there's any risk, they'll just factor it in as a cost.
As a cost. They'll look, is it profitable venture or not? Incentives basically are icing on the cake, nothing more. But what that does is that even the little that we're able to get from these mining, because we do not own them, most of them, we do not own, is taken away. And what you remain with as a country, basically breadcrumbs, where now you're trying to see, and you have huge competing needs, trying to spread yourself very thin within those. Domestic resource mobilization is suffering. For you to be able to now also use that your comparative advantage from the mining sector to be able to touch into other sectors is also compromised. Because this is one resource that we have.
Look at our statistics. 70 or more % of our total exports is copper.
Yes.
But what do we have in return? Again, nothing. Because first, that 70% export goes to the owners of the mine, the people that own the mine.
True.
They have no legal obligation to even repatriate that money back home.
Yeah, exactly,
so you will not, first of all, control your exchange rate.
Indeed.
You will not accumulate foreign reserves.
Indeed.
In fact, you'll be scrounging, for dollars, because will only send very little, maybe for operations and just to pay salaries at the end of the month, and they'll keep the profits in Switzerland and wherever they live. I was just recently looking at our exports, and our largest export is to Switzerland. I said, what goes to Switzerland? Do we take coffee? Do we take tea? What is it?
Yes.
Then it's because the people that market our copper, Glencore and others, are based in Switzerland. While no single ounce of copper goes to Switzerland, but the receipts go to Switzerland. So while the copper will go to India or go to China, but your statistics are showing that your biggest export is to Switzerland.
Indeed.
And I always ask you, economist, you don't see this? You don't remember there is our people? Why are you providing these unnecessary incentives to people that are already rich? And I always give the example of DRC. If you're talking about risks that you have to attract foreign investment, DRC is at war. There's no infrastructure, no reliable power. Sure. But all the big mining houses in the world are in the DRC.
Because you have the resource.
Yeah.
You have the resource. And that's the point. We have the resource. God has blessed us, fortunate enough. And if you look at our population, if we manage that resource, there will be no poor Zambian. in this country. I always like to joke that Zambia is a mismanaged Wakanda.
With so much wealth.
With so much wealth, but we haven't done very well. And it's quite sad because we can definitely do better. We have the opportunity to be able to do better. We have the brains within our country that can be able to take us to where we want to do. But unfortunately,
when you were at Action Aid, I think that's when that study was done for illicit financial flows.
Illicit financial flows, yes.
That demonstrated that Zambia was losing in excess of $3 billion a year.
Correct.
For, by these blue chip companies, from Zambia Sugar to Mopani to KCM and others.
Yes, yes. There have been a lot of studies.
Do we need aid? Because that means if we plug the illicit financial flows, we ensure that all companies pay their appropriate taxes. We do not need aid.
No, definitely. I mean, that argument has always been there, including the now Baroness, I'm sure you know, have a paper very well, Baroness Dambisa Moyo. We were talking about the issue of dead aid. Even locally, there's always been this debate. I mean, looking at the wealth, it's quite insulting that you have so much money, but you're still begging. We need to basically go back and reconfigure ourselves as a country and say we can definitely do better. We have the ability to be able to generate the required revenue. Even now when we're grappling with this issue of debt as a country, where we were there before, we grappled with the same issue, went crying for debt cancellation. We are now back in terms of accumulated debt. We are now restructuring our debt. And the amount compared to our wealth is not insurmountable.
No.
It's not insurmountable at all. It just requires us doing the right thing, but also being selfless, making sure that you put country first before any other interest.
The issue of capital ownership is very critical because if you look at the numbers, our corporate export averages between $5 to $7 billion a year. But because you don't own the mining firms, what you receive are crumbs. I think Dr. Kaunda did well. He identified the issue of ownership and the nationalized industries. Of course, then there was a popular issue in the 90s when Dr. Chuluba and others came across Africa that no, state-owned enterprises, socialist has fallen. These policies have failed. Give up. The private sector will drive your economy. Yeah. And what resulted is a big disaster. Okay. The unemployment crisis we have arises from there because industry is closed. You know what the private sector does? They find these industries, they just relocated them and sold them away. Okay. And we're left with shells with industrial centers in Lusaka and Ndola, Kitwe. That just became warehouses. Indeed. Because of policies like that.
But it's also an issue of how do you utilize your comparative advantage. And where is our comparative advantage? Clearly, as it stands now, it's mining. Mining will always be an important sector. We talk about diversification. The fact that we have not done very well in diversification demonstrates that we have mismanaged our mining sector. Mining sector is supposed to be a stimulus to help us invest the resource that we get from this wealth that we have, our comparative, to push into agriculture, push into tourism, push in this, so that they also now become at par. But the fact that we continue struggling with the mining sector up to now, 60 years of independence, speaks volumes, firstly, in terms of our priorities as a country, but also how we can be able to come out, but also speaks to leadership. You are our leaders. How do you manage these resources? In whose interest do you manage these resources? Those are very, very important questions. And I think this is why I miss civil society is because we were able to give that push. You talked about the issues of illicit financial flows. I mean, it's a big problem. Even now, it's a big problem. We're busy talking about enhancing domestic resource mobilization. But to what extent is issues of illicit financial problems top on the agenda of government? You rarely hear of that. You're basically saying, okay, we need to look, let's tax here, let's tax there, and so forth. But without clearly sealing off the loopholes. And we lose a lot of money through illicit financial flows. And it's a big problem. It's not just Zambia. I mean, most African countries are like that. In addition to that, we even throw in incentives. You're losing your taxes, which are due to you, which should be investing in health, water and sanitation, social protection. And then you're saying, okay, in addition to losing this here, in addition to that, you don't even own the capital. You have no control of that resource. And as long as you don't own that, whoever owns it will have the rights to do whatever they want to do with it. Where they keep their money, and most of them don't even keep, not even most, all of them don't keep their earnings in Zambia. So how do you expect to have a strong currency? Now we are talking about very high copper prices.
Yeah.
Are you seeing a correlation?
Nothing.
No correlation.
It's the highest I've ever seen of copper, literally hovering around $9,000 and $10,000.
Exactly.
You know, when I was selling KCM, the price of copper was around $2,000. It's now stuck $9,000, $10,000. The lowest it has gone in the last 4 years is $8,000.
Exactly. So we really need to relook at these policies. And I mean, we all come up with this saying, you know, this, we can do it like this better. Like you said, us economists never seem to argue, never seem to have a clear point of what should be done. But the fundamentals stand. Issues of equity ownership is a principal one. Issues of getting the right taxation is a critical one. Issues of ensuring you close the loopholes is also very, very essential. And the dynamics around that, you can play around it, but the principles should stand. And this is something that we've grappled with ever since we sold off the mines. And the returns are clear to see. If you talk about employment, again, from the mining sector, it's very minimal. They're becoming highly and highly mechanized. Technology is coming in. Very soon, mining will have no people apart from the managerial.
The equipment, yes.
Yeah, and the equipment will be doing everything.
No, I remember one minister visiting First Quantum in Northwestern Province, and they were showing off these 2 new buckets they had bought. I think one was worth $26 million. And he was saying this bucket, the work it does is the work of 5,000 people.
You see?
It doesn't go sick, you know, it never has a funeral.
It did.
And so they would rather spend $26 million in this equipment that would do work of 5,000 people. Clear. So you're right, agriculture, mining may no longer be the mass employer we think they will be. Yeah. And then we give away the incentives. Where will we employ our people? I bothered Mr. Nshindano to go that way because people have forgotten. They just know you as an electoral expert.
Indeed.
They have no idea that you've worked in civil society very well. They have no idea that you're an economist. So we had to dig that out of you.
But in all that, I think that informed that is the passion for governance, really. So even when we were looking at issues to do with taxation, how the mines are run, and including any other business in this country, it was from that premise of governance, but also how does that benefit the masses? I think my passion has always been uplifting the well-being of Zambians. It's insulting, really, to see the levels of poverty in this country. Really, really, really demeaning. Even when I'm in different forums and somebody asks, what are the poverty levels in Zambia? I feel embarrassed to even mention that, okay, we're hovering over 60%, 60 years after independence. I mean, we shouldn't be at this particular
Zambia,
time.
DRC are some of the wealthiest countries in the world, you know, looking by the mineral resource endowment.
Yes.
And the 2 countries are, again, amongst the poorest countries in the world.
What a paradox.
So that paradox, you know, boils down just to leadership and I think patriotism for our country.
True.
Dr. Kaunda demonstrated in his understanding that he identified ownership, and industrializing. Yeah. But the educated teams that came.
Very true, very true. And I think we tend to also confuse this issue of ownership with nationalization.
Yes. Yeah, speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, there are 2 very distinct issues. Nationalization, I think I also wouldn't be in that. But it's an issue of empowering our citizens to be able to have a stake in this resource that we have. And there's always this debate, do we have Zambians rich enough to own the mines? Government has the resources that can support the Zambians to be able to do that. So us hiding this veil that we do not have Zambians rich enough is because we have not made Zambians rich enough to be able to do that. We have not put in policies, deliberate policies enough that are going to support to create a strong middle class, a strong high class individuals that are wealthy enough to be able to reinvest. And we continuously look outside saying, can we have people to come and invest?
One policy decision in Nigeria made billionaires. The population is quite big, and the agricultural sector is in its nascent state. It fails to feed its people. So the importation of rice was a privilege, especially for foreign companies and Asian companies. One single policy that the importation of rice would be done by local people made billionaires in people like Dangote.
Oh, yeah.
So sometimes our leaders don't see the importance of a policy. Why should, for example, uniforms for our soldiers and teachers, our soldiers, the police and nurses that are made, that are required every year? Yeah. If you have a policy that all uniforms for our soldiers will be made in this country,
sure,
overnight there will be a flourishing textile industry. Yeah. But we continue to import from Turkey, from China, issues like desks, issues like uniforms. And if we said, for example, we are a landlocked country, that's not going to go away. So we are import dependent. Yeah. What are our biggest imports? Fertilizer and oil. We say only Zambians will import fuel and will import fertilizer. Sure. You will make billionaires overnight.
Indeed. And they'll be able to reinvest. And these are deliberate policies that government can be able to take. There are numerous pronouncements, previous governments, current governments, where they're saying we're going to prioritize Zambians in business, of course, government being the largest consumer. But even with that, you find there are a lot of bottlenecks in the procurement processes that are there that to facilitate, of course, the issue of nepotism, regionalism, tribalism, and all those things come through. And this is where we're saying, can we get past that? How do we make sure that we put country first as a people to be able to develop as a nation? I think it's very, very important and extremely critical that we do that.
A position fell vacant suddenly of Chief Electoral Officer at the Electoral Commission of Zambia. And you were among the applicants and you were successful.
Yes.
What made you go to that job?
It's a funny story. Up to now, I even question myself, how did I find myself there? Firstly, I didn't know that there was a vacancy and that my brother now, Chola Chembach, had left.
Yeah.
He was the one that I basically took over. So one of the prominent ladies, I won't mention her name because I didn't take permission to be able to mention. She basically sent me the advert and said, hey, Patrick, look, there's this opening at the Electoral Commission. I was like, huh? Why? Elections, governance. Yes, I do a lot of governance work. And she knew that I'd been supporting political parties. Prior to that, I did a lot of work, actually, with political parties, helping them with manifesto audits, but also trying to align various political parties, working with the National Democratic Institutes to see how their manifestos can be able to respond to national priorities, as it were. So she said, well, you've been working on these things, and I've seen your passion. I think you can make a very good CEO. I said, you know these things, and the perception that people have that you need to know somebody for you to be able to get such a portfolio. I said, would they even look at it? I said, no, there is an advert, so what do you lose? Just throw it in there. I said, this is very political. I'm sure they already have somebody in mind.
With the elections coming up.
With the elections coming up, and it's just 2 years to the general election. I'm sure they already have somebody in mind, even internally. And she says, no, go ahead. I think you have what it takes. At the time, I was actually the executive director for the Civil Society for Poverty Reduction, which is a network of civil society organizations. So I did put through my application, and as it were, I was invited for interviews. When I was invited, I actually called a very good colleague within the civil society. Seiko is a brother to me. I said, look, they've been invited. Should I go? I'm not so sure about this thing. He says, no, go. I said, okay. I even told to him, okay, I will go. But of course, I'm not going to plant myself at the commission. What I want to do is I realized that when we were working in civil society, we had this approach. Insider-outsider approach. There's so much you can do from the outside. You will be able to call out, advocate, and so forth. Sometimes throw stones in civil society. It's necessary at some point where civil society becomes aggressive. But there's so little, there's so much that you can do, but you can also be able to make change within inside. I said, yeah, okay, you're right. Let me also get in there and see what I can be able to contribute. Yeah. And as fate may it be, I was given the opportunity. I was called by the then human resource manager. I said, Mr. Nshindano, you've actually been successful. And the follow-up call from the chairperson, Judge Chulu. And I said, oh, I've been given the job. And the perception most people thought is that I was very connected to the system.
Just to have that job.
Exactly, that I was very connected. I knew people. All the commissioners, I had heard of them, of course. I knew who they were. But in terms of getting to know them at a personal level, I went to know of them when I got into the commission. And for me, that was also one of the motivation that, yes, I'm getting in here because I don't know anybody. And it's a good thing that was the case. And I did receive quite overwhelming response from political parties who welcomed my appointment. I'm very grateful up to now. I think from all divides, both opposition and ruling. Of course, it did get heated up as we went along, but in terms of my getting to the commission, there was a very positive response. And
for civil society, they celebrated your appointment because they knew it was on merit.
Yes, indeed.
And
indeed.
I think they had seen you rise in civil society, and they didn't think that probably you'd compromise your principles for political expedience. I think that's why they celebrated and edged you on.
It did, indeed. No, it was a rare privilege, really, to have saved.
You've applied, you've gotten the job. Yes. At this stage, then you must have taken the matter very seriously.
Yes.
What did you want to achieve?
I think, like I've always, my objective is how do I make my country proud? How do I make sure that my people are better off? I'm saying my people being part of Zambia, better off. Because I realize that electoral processes, democracy, is a key component of socio-economic well-being. If you do not have a healthy democratic state as a country, be rest assured that your social and economic status as well will suffer, because there's a very huge correlation in terms of the quality of leadership, in terms of your stability of the country, but also in terms of external people, how they're seeing how stable your country is. Are they going to bring in money when the country is fragile and all those things? But also, I've been one that has been a champion of good governance, saying this is an opportunity. How do we enhance that? And if you recall, at the time, the commission was coming from a very heated election in 2016, where the president then was even petitioned by the current president. And of course, there were a lot of things that were lying on the table. One of the things, of course, working with a brilliant team, and I must give my thumbs up, allow me to do that, to the team at the commission. They are extremely brilliant staff there, who I found, and some who actually joined. Very innovative, very determined, very passionate individuals. I wish I could have given them bigger wings. I tried in my level best to do that, but I hope that my brother who's there now will be able to give them the requisite tools and support for them to be able to fly. They can do wonders. They've been constrained, a lot of challenges, but given the opportunity, they can really, really do wonders.
Is at the center of deciding who becomes our president.
Yes.
So it attracts a lot of attention. It attracts a lot of negative energy. First, the opposition are very suspicious of the entire team, from commissioners to the CEO and your team. Yeah. The ruling party thinks that you are there to maybe prolong their stay or make their stay, assured. Yeah. So you are in a place where there's so much demand. There's so much demand for you. How do you yield to these demands? Or how do you make them understand that you are a mere birth attendant to express the will of the Zambian people?
Yeah. First and foremost, there is the personal element to an individual. And I think I owe that to God. I'm a Christian. And every morning I would say a prayer to guide me through, because it's not an easy thing to be able to do. You need to have something much bigger to be able to hold on to, knowing that, okay, what are your beliefs? What do you stand for as an individual? Integrity is extremely important at an institution like that. And I was happy to find actually a very supportive chairperson in Justice Esau Chulu. We used to call him Mr. Integrity, because he would always preach about these things. Very, very supportive, and he never wanted anything that would dent him. And of course, you have a lot of stories. One way to get at Justice Chulu was to target his integrity, which he has built over the years. And I was happy that at least in terms of my reporting line, this is somebody who we shared that particular trait. But also recognizing that this is not about the party in power or the party in opposition. This is about Zambia and making sure you do the right things. What do the laws, electoral laws say? What are you supposed to do? Yeah. And you follow through that. And it was as simple as that. Basically, how do you align to that? But for me, I think it was more difficult because I joined the commission, like I said, that coming back from a very highly contested election, and then boom, into COVID, which...
Before you got to COVID, yeah, you made one of the fundamental decisions that I remember received criticism and support at the same time. You decided to bring a new register.
Yes.
The opposition, for me as a political strategist, understanding coming from media, is that the ruling party would rather have an old register, because then they can determine their loyalties. Yeah. And if you're updating the register, they know that the traditional base will not change.
True.
But coming up with a new register was highly controversial for the ruling party.
True.
But for the opposition, they welcomed that, because they knew over the years, we didn't have a new register. From 1996, it was just basically the 1996 register. Yeah. Many people had died, many people had shifted, many people had moved. The credibility of that register, I think, was in doubt. So you had competing issues. How did you deal with that?
Yeah, and on your point where saying the opposition welcomed that, it was actually the other way around.
Oh, there were suspicions both ways.
Yes, the opposition actually fought that we shouldn't have a new register. Funny enough, because coming from the 2016 general elections, that was one of the points of petitioning the elections.
The register.
The register. And its integrity, especially as it relates to the number of deceased persons. And there was even an audit of that register in 2016, which made recommendations that we needed to come up with a fresh register for the 2021 general elections. So it was upon that basis, a recommendation and the recognition that there was a matter before court, petitioning the presidency, hinged to this aspect. So if you don't deal with this aspect, you carry it into another election, it would also still be a matter.
It will be a contested
election as well. But in addition to that, from a planning perspective, I mean, we had overestimated based on statistical data from the Central Statistics, so it's now ZAMStats, pointing to about over 1.4 million deceased individuals in the register. Again, that is a risk, both from a perception dimension, because people would say, okay, deceased persons voted and so forth. We needed to remove that. And our civil registry system in Zambia, unfortunately, is still not robust up to now. 60 years of independence. This is something that we need to work around to make sure that we are able to remove our deceased brothers and sisters from the register, but later on be able to know. In remote areas, you won't even know who's passed on, who's still alive, and so forth. So one of the only ways was to come up with a clean register. With a clean register, you assured everybody who's there, at least majority, 99.9% to be alive, because you can't control.
You relied also on Zamstats, like you are saying, but one of the issues that fell through is that first your register has to come after the census, but the census was not done. In fact, then you relied just on mere projection. I think, again, from the technical speak, that became an issue too.
Yes. Even without census, Zamstats are able to provide those projections.
Okay.
Census basically goes to confirm those numbers they'll get in now, do the head counts, as it were. I'm sure even now, if you go to Zamstats and say, given our birth rate, our growth rate, we should be at this particular point by 2030. Those are figures that are known. And,
yes. Actually, they've upgraded. When we released the statistics, I think we were at 19 million. Yeah. Now we are 20.6, I think, somewhere there.
Yes, and they're able to do that. And it's a scientifically proven method. You would have a plus or minus error, but in principle, that is, statistically, those tend to stand, and they're very sound and valid. So that was one of the key parameters for coming up with a register. And I must mention that it did a lot of good things in terms of coming up with the register, of course, cleaning up. And for the first time, we're also able to enhance the register and the credibility of the election in that we're able to introduce full biometrics for registration, which I hope that the team will continue so that it can also be used for purposes of verification at point of voting as well, which is currently not being implemented. So the introduction of biometric voter register is very, very important, especially for the credibility, to ensure that the people that vote, the individual that votes, is that particular individual. You know there are always these allegations of rigging and so forth, but with the introduction of biometrics, you only have one Nshindano. My fingerprints are unique to me. My facial ID is unique to me. You'll be able to do that, especially if you go a step further, where when at point of voting, one is able to utilize biometric voter identification as a means for you to be able to cast your vote. No other individual will be able to do that. Of course, in jurisdictions we've seen, I'm not saying Zambian jurisdictions, we've seen where these things have happened, where people are able to stuff ballots and so forth. So that mechanism brings in a trust element. Because one of the biggest challenges that electoral management bodies suffer, including our very own here, is a trust deficit. There's a huge trust deficit. So you as an EM need to continue.
I was surprised when I was ambassador in South Africa and later to the AU, and I participated in election observer missions. In pre-brief meetings, Zambia is listed as one of those countries that has one of the best electoral system. Indeed. That is quite credible. And I was surprised that we hold it in very low esteem ourselves. And I would see it out there that we are highly regarded. First, because the votes are counted at a polling station. And then if you have a robust system, you can then track the votes. Yeah. And if there's manipulation, it's easier to identify saying that there's been changes or manipulation, because the counting is done right where people voted. That's one of the hallmark. But this mistrust in our electoral system, and to you people that run the elections, remains high in our country. When I went to Madagascar, there were the ballots were being pulled out of an exercise book, and they give you, then you write in pen, then you vote. I said, oh my, look how far we've become. We have a scientific way of our elections. Yeah. So before we criticize it, we have a system that is deemed credible in Africa.
Indeed. I mean, we are a work in progress. There's no perfect electoral system in the world. There's no perfect elections. But Zambia has demonstrated that incremental kind of improvement from one election to the other and so forth. And we hope that that will be the same come 2026. We'll be able, the team that is there will be able to build up from where we left off, like we did build up from where our colleagues left off. It's a relay. I mean, you understand this very well, similar to leadership. We have not done that very well at political level, but I think this is how it should be. And the EMB has demonstrated that, being able to do. You're talking about counting at polling station. This was also a first during the 2021 general elections. It was not like that in the past. The counting will be done in streams, and then the votes will be collected at a center, at a collection center. But because of the suspicions around the issues of at the point of counting from a polling stream to the collection center, there were allegations that some things were changing and so forth. So we changed. We did away with all polling streams and said we're going to just have polling stations. And that will be final. So the result of the polling station will also be final with the introduction of the Gen 20 form. We remember the Gen 12 then was a controversial issue, was also an issue of the courts for litigation.
Why do you call it Gen 12, Gen 24? Does a G in stand for something?
It's basically general regulations, so number 20, guiding to that particular. Yes.
Okay.
So that was done, that particular form was done, so that when even moving, assuming the process remains the same, if you're getting 2026, the vote will start and end at the polling station. Once you cast, the electoral officers will count, and that is the final vote. Anything else that is done upwards there is basically administrative. And that is a very important accountability mechanism, even for those that are observing, those that are monitoring, and including political parties. If you want to make sure that you keep an eye on the ball, that your vote is well taken care of, there's a term that protect is protected. Protected. That is a place to be. Make sure that you have your polling agents in all the 12,300 plus polling stations that exist, assuming they do not increase, which is a probable possibility that will be done. You do your collation even before the announcement. Of course, it's illegal. You can't do that before the EMB. You would have known how you have performed in an election. So that was a very good thing, and I'm sure.
Before we come to the actual elections and how you conducted it, COVID.
Yes.
COVID shut down the world. You were in the middle of preparations for elections. For example, our statistics were affected. They said they couldn't conduct the statistics because there were many things that wouldn't have been ready with COVID.
True.
How did it impact in your preparations for the 2021 general elections?
Very significantly. Most jurisdictions actually did put off elections. And I would have preferred that we did that as well if I had my own way of doing things, because COVID was an unknown. The risk, was insurmountable. We lost credible men and women in this country, our brothers and sisters. From the commission, we lost staff. Up to today, if there's something that I'm always wondering, what is it that I could have done better? I said, how would I have done to see that I am able to protect some of those staff? As we speak now, probably their families are highly impacted because these are breadwinners. What mechanisms did they leave behind? Did they have any mechanisms, social safety nets to support? But as a result of this huge cause, they were able to lose their lives. These are things that you do not see and you do not hear, and the impact that it has. But also the fact that nobody knew how to conduct elections in a pandemic situation. And this was the first time. So it's basically shooting in the dark. What measures do you put in place? How supportive are the political parties that are participating in this? And clearly, unfortunately, our leaders, the eye was on the ball to get to State House, to get to Parliament, Manda Hill. Nothing else. So whatever measures that the Commission tried to put in place, you had a huge counterforce on the part of the political parties. We tried to put in place a multi-stakeholder team that would look at COVID, of course, with the support of cooperating partners, UNDP, and so forth. Came up with principles for COVID, conducting COVID in elections. Health came in. And of course, you know how that went. It was basically perceived as a mechanism on the part of the Commission to prevent political parties from doing what they needed to do, especially public campaigning, rallies particularly. And that was a very difficult place, especially coming from civil society.
Yeah, because your guidance, your health guidance, relying on Ministry of Health, where you restricted public campaigns, was deemed as stopping the opposition from reaching out.
From reaching out, indeed. So that was a very difficult place. Because again, you want to make sure, as a referee, you create a level playing field where everybody has the same opportunities to get out there, to be able to sell themselves. And those are the tenets of democracy. It's plurality, equal playing field, where somebody is able to go speak. You come speak to me, another person comes speak to me based on their manifestos. I'm able to say, okay, no, I'm going to go with Ambassador Mwamba. So how do you make sure that that is done, but also ensuring that you protect the lives of even the candidates themselves? And we did lose candidates. I'm sure you recall that even after the general election, we had elections that were cancelled, and where we had fresh nominations post the general elections as a result of deaths.
Arising from COVID.
Yeah, arising from COVID. So you could clearly see that this is something. But of course, as it were, it was heated, and everybody was aiming for Manda Hill or State House, and you had to see how do you balance that. It was not easy at all. In addition to that, even just logistically managing elections. All supply chains were closed to get things on time. How do you make sure that you have your ballots in when factories are closed in other jurisdictions? Because other jurisdictions went on lockdowns. There was no production. At the time we were doing our voter registration, I remember plastics was one of those things that was a completely banned movement. And we needed to get those pouches for voter registration. How do you get those things into the country? I remember traveling for one of these due diligence elements as it relates to pouches to Paris. And this was facilitated actually by the France embassy. And we thank it had to take government-to-government kind of intervention for us to be able to do that, because there was no way that the companies would be able to deal and even bring these items. And it required that actual individuals get down there. Even traveling, my wife was so scared at the time, saying, why are you traveling? The world is on lockdown.
Yes.
If we lose you, who's going to take care of the children? You have very small children. But we had to do what we had to do for Zambia. We get to the airports were completely closed. You see one person here, another person there. It felt like a horror movie. You get into a hotel, you're locked into a hotel. I was with two other colleagues, and it appeared like we're the only ones. The hotel will not talk to you. They'll leave notes on your door. You have to order your food. You just find it by your door. You don't even know who's there. It was such a terrible feeling. And I was saying, oh my God, what am I getting into myself? What if something happens to me? Is this worth it? And when you look at your stakeholders, none of them seems to be understanding what you're going through, the pressures that you're going through, or the only perception is that this gentleman wants to rig and prevent and prevent us from doing what we need to be able to do.
Yes. How did you build confidence in this election, you and Chairperson and others? What measures did you, because like you are saying, coming from the 2015 elections and 2016 elections, the opposition held a view that elections were rigged in favor of former President Edgar Lungu. And so they were very suspicious of the commission. They were very suspicious of all of you. Indeed. It didn't matter what you said.
It did.
So how did you build confidence?
Firstly, I think my background also did help. I tend to believe so. Joining the commission, like I said, I was welcomed by all stakeholders, which I'm very humble, up to date. Both ruling and opposition did welcome me, of course, with some words thrown, make sure you do the right things and so forth. But in addition to that was the realization that we needed to be extra open in our dealings. So every step that we undertook as a commission, we became very open, including myself, putting myself in the front line. If you recall, traditionally, it's rare that you'd see a CEO from the electoral management body going forward on these radio programs, TVs, and so forth, having debates, open discussion forums. And I'm glad that the commission allowed me and said, no, go there and be able to have these things discussed and so forth. And then, of course, we had a robust voter education team led by a brilliant lady in voter education. And also we are joined by another brilliant lady in corporate affairs, who are very, very good at what they do to supplement the work that was already going on. And the bottom line is that we try to be as open as possible and as accommodative as possible. We couldn't have done to the expectations of stakeholders, but within our ability, we're able to do that. And we hope that that will be enhanced moving into 2016, and the team will be able to pick it up. Openness and transparency is very, very important in an EMB. You're better off being undressed because of the trust issues than you being closed. It's extremely an important trait that every EMB should have. You should make sure that you're as transparent as possible every step that you take. It doesn't matter how small.
There is a constant word you hear, rigging. Yes. What's your response, having sat at the helm of that institution? Like I said, the 2015-2016 elections, the opposition held that, look, these elections were rigged in favor of Edgar Lungu. Yeah. Now there is a talk that the 2021 elections were rigged in favor of the opposition, the Americans, all these. When you hear that, what do you say?
Well, coming from the EMB, I don't know what that means or what that looks like. What EMBs look for is making sure that elections are credible, and there are many parameters for basically
speaking to
the issue of credibility.
So when I vote, my vote is counted, and finally you announce, speak to that process.
Yeah, so you'll be looking at how transparent, first and foremost, the entire cycle was. So it's not just about the voting, and this is one of the biggest mistakes that we make leading up to the elections. What is it that the EMB has been doing? How transparent has it been in those processes? Because it's those processes that amalgamate into the election day. If the voter registration is not done properly, it will have an impact on the outcome and credibility of an election. If, for instance, you don't do your delimitation exercise well, it is skewed. There's this term of gerrymandering and so forth. If it is not done properly, in line with the law, taking into account populations and all those factors that are taken into account, again, it will have an impact on the credibility of our elections. And I'm talking about credibility because acceptance of outcomes are very, very important. It's that which determines that. You may conduct your elections very well on election day, but if the other processes were not done very well, there will be no acceptability, because one will going to say, no, look, during delimitation, the EMB did the gerrymandering, and they basically did it, the boundaries in favor of Party A against Party B to give undue advantage to this. And this is why they were able to amass this particular vote and be able to get these so many votes and be able to win. So the process of the day is just but one. In addition to that, when you conduct your elections, again, transparency is very important, like I keep emphasizing. You need to carry everybody on board, starting the entire electoral cycle. On the day itself, again, you need to be transparent. How are the processes? And by being transparent, one is being clear of how the process is going to be done. And these are some of the challenges I actually foresaw during my tenure there, is that a lot of people didn't know or understand how that process is done. I vote, then what? What happens? Is Nshindano just sitting on the elections doing something to be able to change that? So that understanding of the process is very, very important for the stakeholders. And that responsibility solely lies on the EMB, because they're the ones that know how they're going to do. And they need to communicate how that process will be done to the masses. It's not a privilege of the Commission. So when you count, you should be able to tell people, when I count, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move your votes to this particular area. When I move you to your votes to this particular area, this is what we are going to do. And this is the person, these are the individuals that are going to be at this particular point in time, right up to the point of declaration is extremely important.
Oh, wonderful. No, wonderful. Briefly, before we leave this subject, the period of elections, what happens to you commissioners and you senior staff? Do they sequester you? Are you quarantined? Do they take away phones from you? What happens? Because, the peace and security of the country is lying on your shoulders, and the commissioners.
Yeah. The nature of the work, of course, will just seclude you from everybody else. Because you need to make sure that you're doing that on your own. And, of course, the Commission will make their own arrangements to make sure that you're focused in doing that. Whether you quarantine yourselves and so forth, those are Commission decisions that you'll be able to do. Like in our case, would of course be isolated, in isolating, making sure that we're just amongst ourselves doing that work for two reasons. One, you're able to make sure that you're available to each other to deal with the issues that are coming. But two, also not to be seen to be interfered by any external forces. Because, for example, if during an election I'm seen at Mandahil and somebody says, we saw Nshindano with the ambassador, and the ambassador has an interest in the election, you can clearly see that that would create a very wrong perception. Meanwhile, we were just greeting, changing pleasantries. So you tend to avoid that. But that is also just the entire nature of the job. Like myself, I really didn't have much of a life. It was just the Commission, church, home, and any other family events, as it were.
Just to protect the office and yourself.
Just to protect myself and the integrity that has to be attached to it. Because, like you said, Zambia is a different world when it comes to politics and the perceptions. You did highlight the fact that we have one of the best electoral systems. But internally, it doesn't appear like that. Externally, we are recognized. Part of that is perception issue. So you need to deal with that. How do you conduct yourselves? And there are many factors. And we hope that even moving forward, we can enhance that process by reforms, even when it comes to issues of how individuals are brought to the Commission, because in as much as you may have people of integrity, appointment procedures do matter. How one gets to that particular, because if you're perceived in a particular view, even when you get to that perception doesn't leave you. It stays with you. And it undermines the credibility of the institution as a whole. So those are factors that you need to take into account. Are the systems that are there be able to promote the required integrity of the institution and the individuals, but be able to protect the individuals so that they can do their job professionally. So in short, to basically come around that, yes, the environment confines you in itself. And it's necessary that you do that because you can't be everywhere and all over as in an electoral manager. I mean, the risk of you being misunderstood is extremely high.
We have elections ahead in 2026. Already the Commission, your successors have been under fire. The President appointed a senior lawyer as a Commission chairperson. I think it's the first time we're having a non-judge as Commission head. And there has been talk of online voting. Did that matter come up while you were CEO, that we should go maybe voting, online voting?
Online voting. Yes, it did. The work that we started, and I'm glad that our colleagues are also thinking around those issues, the issues first and foremost to start with the voter registration, including the full biometrics. We're moving towards that particular, and it's not online, it's electronic voting. At least at the time where
it's electronic voting.
At least at the time
where
I was
you're using voting machines.
Voting machine, like is the case in India, as opposed to using a physical paper ballot that we have. So we did think through that. And yes, it has its advantages and disadvantages, but most importantly is the issue of acceptability. It's extremely important. Like they say in the African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And that's the principle. If you're going to change the electoral system, and this time around the introduction of electronic voting, is the acceptability from the key players, especially the political parties themselves. Are they comfortable with that transition? It has its advantage in that when it comes to electronic voting, first and foremost, results are real time. You'll be able to, once you're done, there and then you basically transmit. And the beauty with electronic voting systems is that one of the threats is the issue of hacking and so forth. These are not online. They don't have any links unless somebody physically goes and manipulates the gadget. So it's not linked. It's a highly protected device. And a good case in point is that of India. I think it would kind of provide a good platform for exchange visits for people to be able to appreciate that and so forth. But also in the long run, it's cost effective. At the initial stage, you'd spend a lot, but with that, it's a lump sum you pay, and then you use it for years to come, as opposed to the ballot papers which we have now, and you print so many based on registered voters, and then the turnout is, luckily last general elections we had the highest voter turnout ever in Zambia.
Which was?
72, if my memory serves me right, 72%. But in most elections, it hovers around 56. You'd have done very well, even in the region. I think South Africa was about 56. So you'd have printed, almost half of the ballot papers go to waste. That's a waste of resources which could either be channeled elsewhere and so forth. But also the idea of linking your biometrics to voting process enhances the element of credibility. Because if you go there and you're verified using your biometric data, which is linked to you being able to vote, because if your bios are not activated, then you're not able to vote. I hope that's the direction they're taking. It would really make sure that only those that have been identified as registered in that particular point are able to vote through that particular system. And to allay all the fears of saying, okay, rigging, ballot paper, stuffing, and so forth, because there's no way you're going to, the system will detect that this individual was not captured, the biometrics were not captured, and there's no way they'll be able to vote. So if it can go that far.
Whatever the advantages of electronic voting are, I think it's just undermined by issues of trust. I think we've had this debate since 1996. True. When the so-called Nikuv register came. The idea was to transition to electronic voting. But we've never come to that, and we are not the only ones. There is high suspicion even in South Africa. I think in the region, only Namibia, I think has electronic voting. It's just an issue of trust.
Which it also stopped now. It's not doing that.
It has gone back to manual.
To manual, because there was a court case. With the case of Namibia, it didn't have a paper trail, because the idea is that once despite you do voting electronically, you should have a paper trail.
Archiving system.
Once you vote, in addition to the machine registering, you also have some form of a small ballot that kind of provides that for audit purposes and so forth.
So even Namibia has...
So Namibia didn't. That was shelved. The court ruling was that they needed to include that element. But I think for one reason or the other, that has not been done yet.
Then we saw the scandal in DRC in the last elections where it was electronic voting. And then you saw machines everywhere. They were not in control. They were not with actual officials.
But that's not unique to electronic voting. It has to do with how you manage the process itself. Okay. The same can be done with physical ballot papers.
You can see ballots flying
everywhere. Somebody can carry that and so forth. So it's an issue of how do you manage your elections? What mechanisms have you put in place to ensure that the integrity of the election is protected? Extremely important.
Okay. The election I think it must have been the tense period. Why do results take long to be announced?
Zambia, first I
Maybe
must
speak to the verification process that you
true,
engage in. Because Zambians don't understand. They vote on Thursday, and by Sunday you have not reviewed the first results.
Yes. Firstly, I must mention that Zambia has one of the fastest times when it comes to announcing elections. When you, in comparison to the continent and indeed the region, our target then was 72, within 72 hours, which is basically 3 days. Other jurisdictions, they go even up to 12 days, provided for. But nothing stops
India,
them.
because of the population, is 7 weeks.
Yeah, but nothing stops them from doing that before that. And in the case of Zambia, we're able to do it before the elapse of the 72 hours. So there are quite a number of processes. It's twofold, making sure that whatever you're going to announce is the right figures. Because if you announce the wrong figures, the repercussions are huge. Despite the law providing for you to be able to make those corrective measures, but the narrative that is carried out there could seriously dent the entire election and its credibility. So there is a verification exercise where once the votes, and I did say that at that particular point in time when you vote, the vote was final at the polling station. Once that is voted, there is a transmission to the totaling centers within each constituency, which of course will give you the winners for the wards and indeed the member of parliament. And of course, the presidential now, which is collected for that particular constituency, is then pushed up to the National Totaling Center, which is at Mlungushi. So there's that process. So from there it goes to this particular point. And this is merely administrative. So you're basically bringing those things together. So you know that, okay, at polling station, you've gotten this. So this goes now to your collation center, which will give you the wards as well as the member of parliament to be able to collect that vote. From there, now you take it up to the national totaling center, which will be able to give you the presidential vote. So that process, again, has to go through a verification process. Does this tally with what was at the polling station before you announce? So there's a verification process. So
there is so much suspicions that political parties now have made it standard to resort to PVT, parallel voter tabulation, because they have no faith that what you will announce are the correct results. And even the PVT now do not help, because first you don't know the scientific and accuracy of them. So people can just announce wild figures and say, our PVT says we've won elections.
True. No, political party PVTs usually favor the party, unfortunately. But there are those that do quite robust and scientifically based PVTs.
Did you allow the PVTs?
Yes, we did. And
officially, or did you just ignore the process?
No, officially. 2016 was the case. CCMG grouping did that. That was basically the officially recognized one, even this time around. But political parties, nothing stopped them. Like I said, the vote started and ended at the polling station. So once you get your polling station, you can total your result, and you'll be able to know. But within the legal confines, of course, you can't announce whatever you have gotten. That also acts, it's a good tool, it's a good mechanism for accountability. You can also
check the commission.
To check the commission. You can verify, based on what I have, this is what is there. And if there's a discrepancy, I mean, the law provides for you to be able to go and check. That's why you have representative at all levels. The polling station, the collation station at MP, and then, of course, you have at the National Totaling Center, they'll be able to bring through. So at the National Totaling Center, what we did is, before we announcing, we'd have copies of what has been verified, which we'll issue to the political party representatives. They would not be part of the verification, because the idea is that they would have done the verification at the polling station. And for them, for the issuance of that verified result is for them to compare with what they have. If there's a discrepancy, they can be able to bring it to the attention of the Commission. And we are glad to mention that the PVT, both 2016 and 2021, were in conformity with the officially
Results.
announced results. Which
Are you allowed to change results? If, for example, a PVT shows that there's an anomaly maybe in a constituency or in...
If there's an error, a genuine error, yes, the law does provide for that amendment within a specified period. I think it should be, if my memory serves me right, 5 days or so. It does give power on the period. Let me not mislead the nation on the period, but it does provide for that. But it's a very short window for you to be able to do. This has to be purely errors, not because of the outcome of the elections. So if somebody, for instance, transposes a number from a polling station and what is announced, so if instead of 31, one says 13, and so forth. So those errors can be corrected by the Commission.
You know, sometimes you have to go to court. You know, we have that famous case of Malole. I don't know if you followed it up, of Emmanuel Mwamba in is that 2006, where he was announced as a winner, yet he was number 2 or number 3. And, you know, the presiding officer says, I have no powers. What I've announced becomes, you can only change it in court. And Emmanuel Mwamba served the entire 5 years as MP.
As MP, yes.
So
but the problem is that declaration had been done at that particular point in time. So because the declaration...
False declaration.
Yeah. If it was not declared and that error was identified, it would have been brought to the attention of the Commission, and the Commission would have rectified that. But after declaration, it becomes a different issue altogether. Because the presiding officer, the returning officer at that particular point, who has power, has already declared as duly winner. So it takes a legal...
Only the court can recognize and make those amendments. Can the president cancel an election? Is it you to cancel the election? Is it the chairperson or is it the president? I'm raising this because there was an issue of the violence that was, I think, rising just before elections. And then we had that sad case of Jackson Kungo in Northwestern Province, a member of the Central Committee of the Patriotic Front, who was then killed at a polling center. And, you know, there were calls that President Lungu should cancel elections. To your knowledge, who has powers in those circumstances? Is it you? Is it the chairperson? Is it the president?
Well, the president has no powers to cancel an election.
The president can't cancel an election?
No, that's for certain. Because it's a constitutional matter. It's vested in the law that an election shall be held every second Thursday. And this time around in 2021, it was on 12th August. So that date is cast in stone. Even when I was saying I wish we could have had the leeway to be able to postpone when we had COVID, we couldn't do that.
Because of the constitutional provision. It locked in the date.
It locked in the date, and that has to be done. It's a constitutional. It would be a breach of the Constitution to move that election, either before or after. It has to be as stipulated. So it is cast in concrete. Even now you know when the elections will be conducted. The law, through the Electoral Process Act, in the cases you're alluding to of electoral violence, it does provide for suspension sanctions of political parties for malpractice. But of course, that does not entail cancellation of the election itself. So you can suspend the political party from participating based on the infractions because they have breached the Electoral Code of Conduct. And we were able to do that as a commission during a first, I'm proud to say, including a first to be able to suspend a sitting government political party, that's the PF. They were suspended together with the UPND for electoral violence. And that was commendable, and it came around as a result of an amendment in the Electoral Process Act, Code of Conduct, I believe it's 2020, which enhanced the powers of the Commission. First and foremost, to be able to move in their own instance, which is quite commendable, because in the past you'd have to rely on this elongated process of conflict management resolution, starting from the district conflict management committees. It's elevated to the national conflict management committees, then the commission. By then, I mean, if it's something that is serious, the country would have erupted into fire. So we needed a mechanism which would allow the Commission to move, especially for serious matters like electoral violence, where it is visible, it is noticeable that this cannot go on. They should be able to move in and bring order, and that was done. It is unfortunate that electoral violence remains a big challenge, and I do foresee it also, unfortunately, being an issue come 2026.
No, we keep on seeing it in by-elections, exactly. So it has become a permanent feature.
Yes, until we deal with it strongly. And one of the things that I'd hoped coming from the 2021 general elections is that we would basically take a sit back and look at what are the fundamental causes of electoral violence. Why do we have it? From my own understanding, part of it, unfortunately, is a strategy on political parties, where they use electoral violence as a tool to undermine first the process itself, but also the opponents. And this is used on both sides of the divide, both opposition and political parties, unless that is also dealt with seriously. And I know political parties will refuse that, no, we don't use it as a strategy, but clearly you will be able to see. Because when you look at the interactions of the citizens during a political environment, I mean, we exchange pleasantries. It's those that are being garnered by political parties, those that are being moved from one jurisdiction to the other, that cause. And the pattern is there, it's clear. But also what we also failed, which I hope government now can go back to, and including colleagues at the Commission, there was a commission of inquiry on electoral violence that was done, and the report was issued. And the report does bring out some of the issues that lead to electoral violence in this country. But we haven't gone aggressively to act on some of those recommendations and indeed further build up on what 2021 did present to us. We haven't done a thorough review of that. And the fear is that come 2026,
these issues will repeat themselves.
Especially as the electoral cycle matures. Because now everybody will say, okay, no, it has reduced, there's peace and so forth. But that's not the case. We are early in the electoral cycle. There's also change of government. When there's change of government, everybody gives the benefit of a doubt to the new administration. And of course, you would not expect that to do. But as the electoral cycle matures, the competitiveness becomes heated up, you will see this increasingly coming up. And if not managed, if we do not identify the factors, if we do not put in place measures that are going to mitigate that quickly, we will see again an eruption of electoral violence.
Many stakeholders wondered why we were printing ballots in Durban or in Dubai, and it still continues. Why do we print ballots outside the country?
I think
How did you deal with that question?
It is a question that keeps coming up. I think it's an issue of capacity, really, nothing else. The procurement of ballot papers is guided by the Public Procurement Act. So it's an open international bidding process, and it doesn't restrict who bids and who doesn't. So you have international players that have bigger capacity than our locals when it comes to the parameters that you're looking for in printing of ballot papers, such as security features, which is also one of the key parameters. You find that most of our locals fell short, or they would go into joint bids with other international just to get that particular parameter. I recall that even on the pricing, our own government printers was even higher in comparison.
To printing, for example, from Dubai or Durban?
From Dubai, exactly.
Wow.
So you have all those parameters. So it's purely just a procurement process. Best bidder wins. So that's how it's been. But it will be important, and I'll be happy one day to see that we are able to do this locally. Successive governments, including the one you were in, Ambassador, you used to talk about capacitating, for example, government printers to be able to do that. Including the current administration, they did talk about it. Why are you going out and so forth. But also important, remember, elections are about trust.
Yeah.
To what extent do we have trust in these local, especially as it relates to ballot printing? If government printers won, would the opposition be very comfortable knowing that government printers is a government-owned and the executive will have a hand in its management? Will that sit very well? Probably that's one. But that was not a factor that was considered in the selection. It's a purely procurement process.
Wonderful, wonderful. I said before we go to the next stage and begin to wind up, you've observed elections across Africa. You have headed the SADC institution, the SADC Forum on elections. And for example, in 2022, you headed a team to head the elections in Eswatini. Yes. What should we do better as we go towards 2026 elections to bring trust to our electoral system? Because there's already a lot of suspicions of the staff that have been appointed by the president, where they're deemed partisan, and just the entire process. What should we do? You looking vastly at how you've looked at various electoral management bodies.
Yeah. I think electoral management is growth, really. It's progressively looking at where you're at and what needs to be improved upon. A good starting point is look at observer reports from 2021. What is it that we're recommending? And when you aggregate that, you see that most of the recommendations, the majority of the recommendations bordered around legal reforms, touching on the Constitution, on the Commission itself, and indeed a few regulations here and there. The regulations, the commissions can immediately do those. So they can look at those and see what were the concerns of the stakeholders and the recommendations from those and be able to work on those immediately. Those that require parliament, that do not require, of course, constitutional amendment, those can also be brought forward so that as you're getting to the general election, some of those contentious issues would have been dealt with, even if they're not contentious, if there are concerns raised, would have been dealt with. The sad part would be to get into an election having not dealt with the issues that were raised.
I think the attitude has been that, when you come from an election observer reports are thrown away.
No.
You do not look at the concerns that were raised, and again, you just begin preparing like for the next election, like you are groping in the dark. So I agree with you that the concerns that were raised before and after elections, it doesn't mean that those issues and concerns have gone away.
No,
they remain so.
They remain so. Yeah. But also, like we've rightly observed the issue of trust. The Commission need to continuously build that. Yes, we have a good Commission. We are recognized within the region and indeed globally that we do a pretty good job. Not perfect, but pretty good job. So they need to continue on that trajectory. One way to do that is being as open as possible. Make sure that they hear the concerns of every stakeholder. It matters. At no point should an EMB take a defensive point. They should always be open to criticism, but also be seen to be impartial. It's not enough to be impartial. You need to be seen to be impartial in your actions as an EMB, because you are the referee. And unfortunately, all the blows, punches will come to you. But there's also this critical environment. There's the EMB, but there's also the operating environment within which political parties do their politics, which is away from the control of the EMB.
Yeah, for example, public rallies before elections, and which brings me to a very good question. Public rallies, you really can't control. It's an issue of other constitutional rights and how we politicians then play themselves out there, something you can't control. Yeah. But it might have impact on the elections.
Definitely.
Like you said, holding elections is a process.
Yeah.
If there is pre-violence before the day of voting, if the people are not allowed to assemble, they've not been allowed to hold public rallies, that impacts the elections that you manage and conduct.
Definitely.
Where elections are deemed, unfair because maybe players were not allowed to canvass with their supporters.
Definitely, and I mean, those are some of the things that observers look at. It's not just on that particular day. You'll have short-term observers that will focus on that. You have long-term observers, and you interrogate the cycle. What did happen, and so forth. You take into account delimitations, where political parties are able to self-determine, where political parties are able to conduct their businesses solicit for funding as well as for votes and so forth. And these are very fundamental principles. We've chosen democracy, pluralism, and government needs to work towards that. Now we have a challenge as it relates to political parties having rallies and so forth. But this is what we've chosen for ourselves. And there has to be that realization that if democracy is going to grow, you need to allow political parties to self-determine, political parties to go and sell themselves, because that is the basis within which the citizens are going to be able to choose who should lead them. It should not be for one to be able to determine who your leader should be. Democracy is about giving a choice to the citizens, and that choice should be exercised freely, but with conscience. And how does that conscience come through? Being able to know, what is Ambassador Mwamba able to offer me that this other gentleman is not able to? Or why it is this other gentleman? But if I don't know what that other gentleman is able to say, even my decision is compromised.
Is impacted.
Yeah. So it is very, very important that that level playing field is provided to all political parties.
I've seen a fresh argument that is emerging that is quite current, that this government or the police are not allowing opposition to hold any public rallies in the last 3 years because ECZ has not declared the campaign season. How did you deal with that?
No, those are two distinct elements. The campaign by ECZ has to do with the election period. So election, ECZ will come up with a date for an election, whether be it a by-election or a general election, saying it's going to be done on this particular day, and now we are opening for you to campaign, to canvass your votes towards this. But the electoral cycle is not limited to that particular, in this case, 90 days. No, the electoral cycle is a full cycle, and you need to allow political parties to self-determine. They are not going to self-determine within that 90 days of election. No, it's throughout the cycle. They need to be able to sell themselves, to reach themselves in the far corners of this country. And you cannot solely do that within that particular period of 90 days. They need to be allowed to be able to do that. And there's always this conflict. So within that purview of that, the Electoral Process Act and the periods that are stipulated, I think the Electoral Commission does a pretty good job in trying to do that. There are challenges, but they do come up with campaign calendars where they allow political parties to kind of have a fair, even though there are challenges, one of them, of course, being the conflict with executive functions. And this is something all successive governments have taken advantage of. Powers of the president, the Electoral Process Act recognizes them, unfortunately, which they, if I were to do reforms, that is one area where, for instance, resources that accrue to the president, where they can use public resources during an election, that should not be allowed because it gives undue advantage to the incumbency. Issues to do if a president goes in a jurisdiction where others are supposed to be, of course, prominence will be given. But that is in law, and the EMB would do very little because of the executive functions that are recognized, that comes with that particular office. So that also needs to be dealt with, moving there. So the point is that generally during that, it's done. But democracy is not about an election period. It's throughout. And when you look at even just how all societies are organized and so forth as it relates to democracy, political parties must self-determine. By the time you're coming to an election period, they should have a level playing field where they're getting into the ring. Even a boxer, you can't get in the ring if you haven't been training. I mean, you'll be wired. So by the time you're getting into the ring, which is the election period, you would have done your own homework. You would have done your due diligence. Part of that requires you knowing, understanding what is the needs of the people. And how do you get to understand the needs of the people that you want to represent is by interacting with them. And of course, the Constitution guarantees freedoms of association, freedoms of assembly. So it doesn't, that is totally different from
I knew that the argument was fallacious, where they were saying, no, we are not in an electoral cycle, ECZ has not declared. When do political parties mobilize? When do they build structures? So clearly, it's a fallacy that they are using that as an argument, and I'm glad that you've provided guidance. Before I let you go, we are celebrating 60 years as a country. We started off as a very wealthy country in 1964. We are now among the poorest in the world. We started very well. It's something we've kept as a country. Our peace and security really hasn't fractured, although it's now continuously threatened. I want you to give us some review and thoughts just over the last 60 years, what the contributions were, especially by our leaders. And since you are coming from the sector you are coming from, especially civil society and as an election manager, so the issues of democracy become very key, because that's where your greatest contribution has been to this country. Let's start with Dr. Kenneth David Kaunda.
I think from him, the mere aspect of liberating Zambia, taking us to be an independent country, you cannot take away that. Colonialism was a terrible thing for the country and us being able to get to that particular point, but also instilling the principle. We had democracy in the initial stage of independence.
Yes, from 1964 to up to 1973, we had a multi-party state.
We had a multi-party state, and of course, we moved into a one-party state. And the trigger for the one-party state was the challenges we faced on the social and economic. And this, remember when I said there is a correlation between that. And it didn't improve from there on. It started going downwards. And therefore, the role in which citizens play in governance cannot be underestimated or underplayed. So you need to allow citizens' voices to be able to thrive. And this can even be seen from the beginning, where we had multi-party system. And then as we started facing challenges, we moved to a one-party state. But of course, that was the foundation. What we needed to do was continuously build on that. And even when we came into a multi-party system in 1991, back to the multi-party system, we did see the proliferation of political parties coming into play, which was welcome. But we also, what we forgot, from my view, was to build on what we had. What is it that we needed to carry from the previous both lessons that were learned when we started our multi-party independence, what led us to the one-party state, and then back to multipartism, and build on that, and build those legacies and be able to carry them forward. One of the things that we are not very good at as a country, unfortunately, is recognizing the legacies of other governments. I think it's very detrimental. What we need to have is incremental development, not where you come in and you basically want to show it's me. I think it doesn't work. And this has been the trend from successful governments. MMD came in, they basically wanted to throw everything.
That Kaunda did, began to reinvent the wheel.
Reinvent and so forth.
And it has continued.
And it has continued. There are so many brilliant things that other governments have done, and I hope that even the current government will be able to pick up from the brilliant things that the PF did and throw away all the bad things. It is only beneficial for the country. So there has been that trajectory. But one of the things that you note is that as a country, even our recognition as a pillar of peace as well as democracy is the fact that we've been able to recognize that this is the governance system that we want. And we've been able to successfully change governments. Peacefully, for that matter. Yes, we've had electoral violence here and there, but that does not warrant us to say, no, it were not peaceful elections at all. These are selected few, even if we say there's no, one life is too many to lose in an election. And we hope that moving forward we will not have that. But that spirit that we've embodied in ourselves now should be able to translate to the well-being of our people. There's no way, what's democracy without the dividends of democracy? And it doesn't, you can sing all you want, you can say we've changed 6, 7 presidents. If the dividends of that change do not accrue to the people, and I think this is where when it comes to myself and my self-reflection over 60 years, this is where I have a huge concern. Because when you look at the poverty levels, like we are saying, we're a very wealthy country at independence. Where are we now? we are reduced to crumbs. There's seriously something wrong which we need to interrogate, and this can only be done as a united front, as one Zambia, one nation, and coming up with solutions that are beneficial to all of us, but also going to improve the well-being of our citizens. Human development.
Frederick Chiluba, he comes, there's reintroduction of multi-party state, reintroduction of democracy.
I mean, it was a jubilating point at that particular point in time. And I was in Chipata, a young man then. And I remember my family was a very strong UNIP supporters. I'm sure on social media you might even come across one of a picture where I'm actually clad in UNIP regalia in Land Rover 110
yes.
On a campaign trail in UNIP, because UNIP used to be very strong in the
Eastern Province. In fact, it swept Eastern Province but lost the entire country.
Exactly, exactly. So it was quite a momentous occasion to be able to see that, but also unbelievable to get to that particular point in time. But it also gave Zambians back a voice. I think one of the things that most people struggled with is civil liberties during the one-party state. And we need to cherish those. For me, coming from civil society, looking at how we can be able to defend our rights, one of the things that came with multipartism was that particular element, especially as it came to civil liberties, freedoms to associate, freedoms to assemble, and so forth. They are very, very cardinal to development. Whatever developmental agenda you're going to put forward, who is it for? And what informs that? And in my view, citizens have to have a play in governance in deciding that.
Levy Patrick Nshindano.
Of course, rule of law cannot be taken away from the man. I think he was very hardworking. I think he, unfortunately, like you said, we didn't throw enough flowers at him when he was alive. He was one of the most criticized presidents. But despite all that criticism, he did his level best and he delivered, especially on the side of rule of law. He's one of those that stood by principle. And I hope we could see a little bit more men and women of that stature, especially as it comes to principle and integrity. I think for me that stands out quite a lot.
Oh, wonderful. Rupia Bwezanbanda.
Very lovable.
Yeah.
Very lovable man. I did meet him, I think, twice or 3 times, if my memory serves me right. Very upfront, very approachable. I think that's a trait that was very, very good when it came to President Banda. One would be able to approach him regardless of your status. You'd reach out and say, Mr. President, and he would greet you, and you'll have a nice conversation, a genuine conversation, not a plastic one where you say, okay, no, you really take keen interest. And I think that's a quality that kind of stood out. On the governance side, I think he must have, in my view, I could be wrong, he kind of pulled off the gas a bit in terms of enforcement and making sure that he kept guard on everybody on what they are doing, which is a bit similar, I believe, to our former President Lungu. I believe he's a very good man. I always make a joke because one of the things that when you interact with people, they'll tell you, Paseko number ya ECL.
Yeah.
And I always tell you, it's funny, up to date, I do not have the number for President Lungu.
Because you were CEO at ECZ, so they think that you must have been in very good books.
Very good books and interacted.
President.
Yes, indeed. No, we didn't. We kept it at arm's length, very professional. And if there was anything, because the law states that all reports of the commission have to be submitted to the president.
The president.
Yes. So in that vein, of course, through the commission chairperson, you would go and do what you need to do in terms of presenting, but it ended there. There was no interaction whatsoever. So it was purely professional, which many people find
hard to believe.
But
I think with this explanation, you gave us at the beginning how you got the job in the first place, without knowing anyone and going there merely on merit. Yeah, and that it was possible to get such a senior, sensitive job merely on your qualification and merit. Yeah. Michael Sata,
I might also kind of link it up to President Lungu because of the continuity element. One of the things that, first of all, President Sata was no other. He was a very strong person. You could clearly see what he wanted to do. Even when he was in opposition, it was very clear. There are a number of presidents where you're always wondering, okay, what's the position as? But President Sata, from the onset, you knew exactly what he wanted, and he told you up front, this is what I'm going to do. And when he got in government, he did exactly that. One of the things that stands out for me with President Sata is his push for human development in terms of the social well-being of the people. You'd see that even when, through his career, in terms of his empowerment programs, the housing and so forth. But even when he came in, you'd see a lot of increment towards social sector spending and so forth, trying to uplift their lives. And the element of ownership, trying to emphasize how Zambians can be able to do these things, and of course the infrastructure, which was also seen in the national development plans. Accelerated infrastructure development was a prominent pillar, which I believe President Lungu was also able to take up and continue on that path in terms of building, which it should be. And understandably so, it's the same political party changing leadership.
You touched on Edgar Lungu. Anything else before we go to the current president?
Yes, I think on President Lungu as well, when it came, in addition to, of course, picking up on the legacy element from President Sata, he's also one of those that appears to be approachable. Unfortunately, I didn't get the opportunity, like I said, to be able to interact with him on that particular level because of my role and in a bid to remain impartial and not to be seen.
And to be seen, to be independent.
To be independent.
Not just to be independent, but to be seen to be independent. Okay.
Yeah.
The current president?
The current president, what I see is that he says all the right things. I hope you'll be able to see them through. Currently, I think he needs a lot of work. Firstly, because of the disjoint, and I'll speak this from the democracy side of things, especially as it relates to civil liberties, the right to associate, right to assemble. What you see, especially with regards to the policing, I mean, this is detrimental to our democracy. We would have expected that you'd see better. The president did come on that front of ensuring that we improve and enhance our democracy. And as a governance person, I was very happy saying, okay, we have a president that is talking towards uplifting and improving governance systems in the country and, of course, promoting democracy. I hope that this is but a hump that will be able to deal with. I did hear his last address where he was very firm on the police, and I hope that the police will be able to see this through. These are constitutional rights. No matter how one wants to massage them, political parties have the right to self-determination. Political parties have the right to be able to assemble, but also it robs citizens of quality leadership. People need to hear, what is Ambassador Mwamba bringing to the table? I should not be able to go and vote. What's the point of me going to vote if I don't hear from you? I need to understand what our leaders are able to bring to the table. And the only way citizens are going to do that is if they have a choice and they're able to do that. Unfortunately, this is a governance system that we have been able to choose for ourselves, that this is how we are going to determine our leadership. And we need to build on that and ensure that it is enhanced. And I hope President Hichilema will live up to the task.
The 60 years we're celebrating, going into the next 60, there are things that we should put behind our back. But the multi-party democracy doesn't seem to have favored us well. We have political parties that are emerging on tribal or regional lines. We have candidates with the habit of regressing to their regional bases. There is literally a threat to national building and our national building project of One Zambia, One Nation. What should we do better? I hope the PhD you are doing is somewhere around there.
Yeah. Well, my PhD is in business and management.
Oh, you've gone to business, okay. Yeah.
But my thesis is on electoral integrity. It touches a bit on electoral integrity.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I hope I can touch on some of these things. I will be defending in the next 2 weeks.
Good.
Yeah, so
good.
I wish me luck.
The next time I meet you, I'll call you Dr. Nshindano.
I pray so. I pray so too. Yeah.
So I worry about the polarization that this type of governance has brought to us.
Yeah.
While democracy and multi-party politics is celebrated so highly, it doesn't seem to do so to Africa. Like I said, it's fragmenting us, balkanizing us, and it's a matter of concern. The rise of tribalism and regionalism is of great concern because it doesn't give us a good future.
Yeah, I don't, and this is my personal view. I don't think that democracy or multipartism is necessarily a bad thing, and this is what is basically causing us. Democracy in itself, I think it's a brilliant concept. The form and shape you can self-determine. It doesn't have to be generic. Especially for me, the reason why I think democracy is important and is fundamental for any country is that it provides voice. And that voice is very critical. You want to make sure that your people are able to participate in the governance. You want to make sure that your people are able to hold you to account as leaders. And it's very, very important. Where I think we have failed, especially as it relates to our governance system, is on the part of leadership. What motivates leaders to get into office? This is something we need to interrogate. Those that are not into politics, what is it that keeps them away? Why are we so fixated on fixing each other? Yeah. As opposed to developing the country, as opposed to coming together as one. We need to get to a point where there is that recognition. Earlier on, I think when I came in the studio, I did mention of a podcast that I listened of. Yes, and how he was able to bring out the issues of how we began as a country, and of course the composition of cabinet and the one kind of mindedness we were as a country in terms of national unity, but cause as well. Somehow we lost that. We kind of sidetracked. Of course, multipartism tends to bring that about because we chose plurality. Plurality doesn't mean we cannot have one common cause. Plurality is being able to bring different ideas together. And I think that's where we are missing it. Plurality means that now our plurality, we have taken it. And on plurality,
did you ever come across proposals that we could limit the number of political parties that we should have? Because it must have been a nightmare for you to have 13 candidates or 16 political parties.
No, there's always that argument. It will always be there. But look at South Africa. They had over 100 political parties participating in the general election. So it is healthy. It is healthy. I mean, people need to self-organize if you have an idea. And the beauty is that with the electoral system, it allows them to have a voice. And this is one of the challenges that we have. We also need to look at our electoral system. This one winner takes it all.
Yeah, the first past the post.
Yeah, winner takes it all is basically a problem, especially when it comes to national unity, because the one who wins, you may win by 50% plus one vote. What happens to the 49.9? Because the ones that were voted have legitimacy from those individuals, but their voice is never heard. They're basically thrown out until the next election, which we need to really rethink, because they have something to say. It's a huge constituency, and even when you compare it to the overall population, the number that have voted, it's a drop in the ocean. So you have the minority speaking or ruling on behalf of the majority citizens. So we need to relook at also our
electoral system.
How inclusive is it? How does it ensure that all the voices are taken into account? You cannot throw away legitimate voices of 49 plus percentage of voters and say, okay, you don't count, your voice doesn't count. But also deliberately, those that get power, and this is successive governments, make very little effort to integrate those voices into the governance of the country.
It's clear,
it's
like
them
it says,
against us.
Winner takes all, everything.
Exactly.
What are your last words as we begin to close?
I think it's to re-echo what everybody is talking about in the recent past, the issues of national unity, very fundamental for our country. We need to realize that we only have one Zambia, and if there's anybody who's going to develop this country, it's us Zambians, nobody else. So we need to put our efforts together. But also, most importantly, we need to recognize that the biggest challenge that we face, and I used to say this quite a lot in civil society, is poverty. As long as you have poverty levels hovering over 60%, I mean, you cannot develop as a country. We need to make sure that we deal with that issue and you deal with it upfront. Cosmetic measures, appeasement measures, where you throw crumbs at poor people. There has to be deliberate measures, education, social protection, strong social safety nets need to be put for people to make sure that they live a better life. And this is why increasingly, as Zambia grows, both in population and in years, economically, you're going to see a huge discontentment from the citizens because the majority are being left out. And people who also rise against the few that have. Because they'll be saying, look, these people are eating alone. And we are clearly seeing this now. Even you politicians, there's a lot of discontent from the citizens when they look at the politician, because now the notion is that every politician is out there for themselves. You give them a vote and they disappear. I think we need to move.
Which is a nightmare for you who manage elections, because then you are met with voter apathy. Because the citizenry begin to say, these are the same people. They all lie, they never tell the truth. And even when we vote for them, they disappear. They never fulfill our obligations. And it affects on the turnout that you want, because you want people to participate. But then they are beginning to understand that maybe my vote is not really changing, So you are right about that, that we all have a role to play. Not just the citizens, but the way we conduct ourselves when we are in office.
Indeed. But also, I would also now look back to election management itself. I think they do need the support of every Zambian, including the stakeholders. There are significant challenges that election management bodies and indeed our own do face. Issues to do with independence. And when you talk about independence, it's not about compromised individuals. There's an element of financial independence that needs to be looked into. Do they have the requisite support for them to be able to do what they need to do? That is also important, and that can only come through reforms that are going to make sure that the resources that go to the commission are ring-fenced. There are numerous reforms that need to happen with regards to the legal provisions, which they can only go thus far. They can do a bit of regulations here and there. But
you say you are independent, but the Minister of Finance is holding your purse, and he can decide and determine when to give it to you or not.
Exactly. So legal reforms, again, that requires support as well as political will to make sure that things are done. For example, I did highlight the issue of incumbency power as it relates to campaign, which clearly distorts the environment when you're talking about fairness. But would an incumbent president want to give up that power? Again, it requires support of the citizens to recognize that this does not create a playing field. And we have seen this being abused. Successive presidents, we did see it with President Lungu. We have seen it with President Hichilema. In their cases, President Lungu, I think the most prominent one is the Chilubi Island. President Hichilema, we did see it in Kabwata and so forth. So these things...
He now even goes to small ward elections in Imporokoso. The entire president takes a machinery to a ward election. Come on, that's the abuse. If he was using his money, he would not make such a decision.
Yeah, so we need to look at reforms that are going to make sure that they definitely give the required powers to the EMB. So the EMB does require support, and you as stakeholders need to provide the support, but the EMB also needs to be open enough and willing to say, okay, these are the gaps, these are the challenges we are facing, and we require help here and there for us to be delivered. Democracy is something we need to cherish as a country. It's a very important principle that we've chosen for ourselves, but it has proven that it does deliver.
And it requires our hard work, actually.
Indeed. But most importantly, it also kind of promotes fundamental human rights. And every individual's rights must be protected.
And respected.
And what best way to protect those than through a democratic dispensation?
Oh, wonderful. Kryticous Patrick Nshindano, I'm very happy, sir, that you came and spent some time here and share with Zambians your thoughts, your experience. And as we reflect on the 60 years as a country, what can we do better? What did we do wrong? What can we improve on? I think that's a perspective that we keep our country better, united, and prosperous. Indeed. We shouldn't have the number of poor people that we have in this country. So to our dear viewers, I was privileged to have hosted Kryticous Patrick Nshindano. You remember him as the Chief Electoral Officer of the Electoral Commission of Zambia. He successfully oversaw the 2021 general elections, ensuring a smooth and peaceful transition that you and I are enjoying. They were the midwife to ensure that one government birthed another in peace. And to you, Mr. Nshindano, I would like to thank you, recognize the contribution you've made to our country, tell you that the country appreciates what you've done. And we hope that your successors will build on where you left and not take away, like we have seen in the past, where successive governments have a habit of taking away the achievements of the others. So until next time, good day and good viewership. Thank you very much.